All right, here we are, lesson three. And so, lesson three is it's called system failure. And I'm going to be honest with you, some of you might think, I don't need to know all this. I just want to start doing what actually works. But for someone like me, and I know there's a lot of you are like this, you almost want to know why. Like, why is the system so jacked up? Like, why was I pushed to do all these things that fail? Why does it have to be this hard? And I think when you start to understand why, it can kind of help you heal a little bit, and it can kind of help you give you that confidence to do things the right way. So these are for those people like me who just need a little bit more information. They need that deeper understanding. And then we'll just quickly move on in the next lessons to start putting the things into action that will really work. So here's the big question I used to ask myself. Why am I always given this bad advice? These are good people. They're not trying to give me bad advice. So why do they keep giving this bad advice? See, most of us started off our career journey by going to the career center. And the career centers, well, long story short, I ended up, when I started DC Hopefuls, I ended up interacting with a lot of career centers. And I got to know 4 or 5 people in different universities pretty well. And what I learned is that they all belong to these kind of like national organizations. And so each year they go to these big conferences, and there's about 5 or 6 speakers who go to these conferences, and they give them all the same advice. So your career center in Ohio is getting the same tactics and tips as a career center in Wisconsin or California, right? They're bringing it all back. So kind of this approach is becoming very universal, and it's becoming one size fits all. And the problem is they don't slow down and think, well, gee, sure, my engineering grad or my nursing major, sure, that person is very desired and wanted. And it makes a ton of sense for that technical person to come to me in the Career Center and let me, probably an English major or a liberal arts major, work with them, make that resume actually read well, help them write the cover letter, make sure there's not typos or whatever. But in reality, their skill set is so easy to understand. It's clear cut, and the world needs those skills. So of course, I help them for an hour, and then they go get 6 interviews out of 10 applications. And we pat ourselves on the back and we think, oh, we've done it. But in reality, that doesn't work for the actual liberal arts majors. People like us who our skills are very vague, they're gray, they're hard to quantify, and they're hard to define. And we carry that with us throughout our career, trying to act like we're an engineer or a nurse, when in reality, we're not. And so we beat ourselves up when we don't hear back on an application, realizing that that's not how our world works in the first place. And the problem for a lot of people is early on when they were in college, they would go to professors, um, and they would try to talk to them and get advice. But often professors, they don't often know better. Many of them have spent their entire careers in academia. So they don't really actually know how to tell you to go work on Capitol Hill or work at the Pentagon, right? They don't know how to tell you to go work for that up and coming nonprofit because they've never really done it. So they'll kind of regurgitate that advice they hear over and over. But here's another thing that happened to me a lot. I would go talk to seasoned professionals, that person with the incredible career that I really admired and thought was amazing. But they thought, gee, the world has changed. They think, yeah, when I went to college in the 90s or in the early 2000s, you had to go network, you had to do these sort of things. But they hear so much about LinkedIn and these job boards, and they hear all about social media that they don't want to sound like a dinosaur. So I actually had people giving me advice that when I actually then turned and asked, well, is that how you did it? They say, well, no, I've never actually done that myself. They'll give you advice that they've never actually followed because they think that's what now works, when in reality, what they were always doing has always worked. And then young professionals, our peer group. I'm not so young anymore, but think of your peer group or even people younger who still have a lot of value. Often they're embarrassed to tell you they got there the right way. I remember my very first job thinking, God, I didn't deserve this. I needed to know somebody to get it. Like, I didn't really think of that as networking. I thought of it as a favor. And I kind of felt this shame. And what I would realize is years later, after becoming friends with 3 of my coworkers, that all 3 of them had someone help them, that none of us had actually applied to work there and gotten it the way we were supposed to. And all of us felt this weird shame about it. And we were embarrassed because it wasn't sexy and cool to be like, well, I had to ask this friend for help like 10 times. And then he finally helped get me an interview in this office. So, like, we hid that from the world, not realizing that that was actually something to be incredibly proud of. Um, and then a lot of times, what will happen is people think that networking is flagging your resume or sending you a link to a job. So you go and you try to network, and that's what people think. Oh, yeah, I'll help you network. Let me flag your resume. And they think so transactionally, and they convince you that's what works. And so when your resume that's flagged still never gets through, you begin to blame yourself, realizing that you weren't really without realizing you weren't really networking, and they don't realize you weren't really networking. And that's why, I really think that the internet in a lot of ways has kind of ruined us. It began to teach entire generations of people that to build a career, you had to go apply online and write cover letters. And the only way to network was to find someone who matched what you wanted to do on LinkedIn, even though they were a total stranger, and send them a cold reach out, which of course doesn't work because that person doesn't know you, and that's weird. So again, our skills are not tangible. We often want to do something that we've never actually done before, right? Like, in a lot of ways, my wife's a nurse, so I understand, like, nursing students by the time they graduate have worked as nurses. They've been in the hospital. They've literally done it. So, like, most of the hospitals have either seen them do it and will just hire them, or a new hospital knows, okay, he's been a nurse. You know what I mean? Where, like, we don't really often get that chance unless we're willing to do it for free as an intern, which is impossible for many of us. Otherwise, people just have to take a chance on us. So the point is that the people giving you this bad advice, pushing you to these transactional networking events, these sending you job links, flagging your resumes, telling you they don't know what else to tell you except go apply. They're not bad people, right? They're not jerks. And I want you to keep that in your mind as you watch these other videos, because what's going to happen is you're going to think, well, who am I going to network with? Everyone I've ever talked to gives me bad advice. That's okay. What I'm going to teach you moving forward is when you understand how it really works, you can actually help them help you. You can go and change the whole dynamic of the conversation and get them thinking in a completely different way. So it'll be very natural to help you. And they won't even realize this shift or this change. And it won't even occur to them to send you a link to a job board or tell you about LinkedIn profiles, because that's not even what the conversation is about. So I needed you to just kind of come to terms with that the career centers kind of started this maybe 15, 20 years ago, this push, because if you really think about it, they were going the way of Travelocity. I had a career center person tell me once there was this huge fear that they were going to become the next travel agents. So for those of you who don't remember, there used to be a time where if you wanted to go on a trip, you had to go to a travel agent. And then all of a sudden the internet came along. We had Travelocity and all these travel sites, and like, you really just don't need travel agents anymore. I mean, I guess from very unique circumstances. And career centers realized, what is our purpose? If everyone can just go apply online, they're not going to need us the way they used to. So they pivoted to that, and they decided, well, we'll just help you through that process, which again makes sense if you're an engineer or a nurse. It does not work for us. And sadly, this whole generation of career center workers went away from real authentic networking. They quit giving us the advice that we really needed. And now they don't even know that advice should exist. And now we've had the generation, like, I'd say 15 years, 20 years of college graduates who've all come out not knowing how to do this, and they think they're failing, and they're not. So hopefully that makes sense. This video went longer than I wanted it to, but lesson 4 is going to be a lot of fun. Lesson 4 is we're going to really start talking about networking, and we're going to talk about all the tactics in networking that don't work. Before you can know what does work, I want to hammer home why these tactics you have been given about networking fail. And again, it's not your fault.